cloud. That's what it
Oh, now it's recording.
there. Yep, there we go. Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. This is Laconia Technical Services section. Our program today is going to be RDA Book Cataloging with Bobby Bothmann, and we'll get started in a few minutes, but we're going to go ahead and have our brief business meeting. Welcome. Here's the agenda. I'll start with the agenda since Rebecca Fenning was so nice to create some slides for me. We'll do the brief business meeting, then we'll have the presentation with a break, and that will be determined by Bobby. We are recording this session, so I believe you'll be sent a notification, or just check next week on the Laconia website and it will be available. Okay, there we go. Our committee members. Hi, everyone. Big surprise. I'm Joy Anholt. I'm the Technical Services Manager at the Tinley Park Public Library and your president for this year. Our Vice President is Laura Murph from the Lisle Library District. Our Secretary is Emily Borsa from the Hinsdale Public Library. The Treasurer is Linda Ling from the Joliet Public Library. And our governing board representatives are Alex Vincina from Helen Plum and Laura Murph from Lisle Library District. And then our committee members are Rebecca Bartlett from LaGrange Park Public Library, Sarah Ferger from Joliet, Rebecca Fenning, who's the past president from Plainfield Area Public Library, and Amy Weiss from Woodridge. I will talk briefly about Rebecca Fenning, if you want to talk about the Laconia SAM book discussion.
Yeah, so the next Laconia wide program is from SAM, which is the managers, and I forget the rest of the acronym group. They are having a book discussion on the book Radical Candor. There are 2 sessions. There's one Monday, March 10th at 4 at the Schiller Park Public Library, and there's one Friday, March 14th at 1 at Hopscotch and Vine. So you have some time to get the book, and then they have like the book writer has like created a Q&A kind of program, and I imagine that's what they'll be following. So should be interesting.
Thank you. And then save the dates. We have 2 firm dates. May 9th, we're going to have some international vendors, and that will be in person. The location is to be determined. And September 5th, we're going to have a book repair with the book doctor from Demco here at Tinley Park on September 5th. And in November, we're going to have an unconference, and we're still working on that date. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If everybody could please edit your name to show your name and then parentheses your library. So if you have a question and Bobby needs to follow up, we know who to contact. That would be greatly appreciated. Please use chat for your questions. And if we need to, we will ask you to unmute. And I think that's it. So Bobby, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think you have to unshare first. There's that. So Radical Candor, I hope that you also watch like the first season of Star Trek Picard. So some of you may get that reference. It's quite fun. Thanks for having me again. My name's Bobby Bothmann. I am the catalog and metadata librarian at Minnesota State University, Mankato. I'm in my 23rd year there, really looking at the retirement light at the end of the tunnel as soon as I can. I have 4 dogs scattered around the house, 2 behind me. Hopefully they won't make a ruckus. They're all kind of napping right now, so I think it should be fine. And the mics haven't been picking up some of their excitement with squirrels and things like that, but hopefully all will go well. I've been teaching for the University of Illinois iSchool for almost 15 years now. And I've been cataloging all sorts of things, often media types of resources as well, for gosh, I think it's almost 30 years now. So it's yeah, I'm hitting the long in the tooth mark, I guess. So we'll be talking today about cataloging books. I've named this cataloging textual monographic resources with RDA. And let's see, get that in there. It won't go. Let me see if I can type it. So in the chat, hopefully everyone can see that, is the bit.ly link that you see right here. So that will take you right to these slides in my Google Slide Docs. And you are free to reuse, remix, save, however you want to do it. They're CC BY, so attribution is the only thing that you need to really worry about with that. So to get started here, the scope of this presentation is generally going to use examples. We're going to go in RDA order, so a few things will be out of MARC order that we're sort of used to. We're going to start with describing manifestations and items, and then move on to works and expressions, attributes of agents, so persons and corporate bodies, and relationships. So every now and then you'll also see this little dog-eared icon, and I've got that there when you want to make, when it's a good idea for your cataloging shop to make some guidelines, make some choices, and document those choices. Because one of the aspects of original RDA, which is what we will be learning, talking about today, is that an institution can make certain choices. So that's what we'll be looking at. In the lower right, you'll see a slide number. Feel free to ask a question in the chat anytime. I have the chat up, and I am pretty good now from teaching online for so long at noticing those questions. It's helpful if you reference the slide number for me, because I may go past that, and that helps me just with context of what your question is about. Okay, so I want to start this one off with cataloger's judgment, and there's a lot of text on here, and I'm going to read it to you because I think it's important. So starting with ACR2 Rule 0.9, it says, these rules recognize the necessity for judgment and interpretation by the cataloger, which may be based on the requirements of a particular catalog or upon the use of the items being cataloged. The need for judgment is indicated in these rules by words and phrases such as, if appropriate, important, and if necessary. And then our old pal Charles Cotter said, cataloging is an art, not a science. No rules can take the place of experience and good judgment, but some of the results of experience may be best indicated by rules. And the last one here is this great article by Zhenli Diao from, let's see, 2017, where they state catalogers' judgment bears strong personal traits that are reinforced by awareness, rationale, knowledge, and quality. So the lesson here, the moral here that I hope to convey is that even though as we go through these slides and we look at all of these different RDA guidelines and we talk about certain choices and whatnot, you as the cataloger always have that power of judgment. You as the cataloger are always working for your users, right? So just because the official guidelines say one thing, or just because the Library of Congress or the PCC have their own policy statements and interpretations, that doesn't necessarily mean that you also need to follow that if it is better for your users. And there's also some distinctions that we would want to make, such as what we do in our own catalog versus what we would do in a consortial shared catalog versus what we might do in, say, WorldCat, for those of you who are OCLC members. So judgment and interpretation are really important. This is a big part of what original RDA encapsulates, even though original RDA really looks more at transcription of the evidence that is based there. So in some cases, there's a little less thinking and interpretation that you have to do. So, and then it's way too early still to even begin to talk very much about official RDA, where essentially everything is an option. So that's something to think about and talk about. Probably it's probably going to be at least another year before we have some really good information, because they're not even a year into the first part of their implementation. So having said that, core elements for a manifestation. So the first thing I want to talk about are these core elements. And we've heard a lot about the core elements from the very beginning of RDA. And some of you may even recall way back when that there were core and core if elements. Well, the core if elements really did not last very long. During one of the major revisions that happened, almost all of those core if types of instructions completely disappeared. So really what we have are core elements. So on the left side of the screen, you see what those are. So the title proper, all other title elements are optional. The statement of responsibility, the first is core, all others are optional. The edition statement, numbering of serials, production statement for unpublished manifestations, publication statement for published manifestations, series statement, identifier for the manifestation, the carrier type, and the extent. So those are all the ones that are core. And on the right side of the screen, we see the bare minimum that you can have for a bibliographic description. So if you have something that only has a title and there's no statement of responsibility, title proper, you have to transcribe that. And the publication statement, you also have to provide that, even if every single piece of it is place of publication not identified, publisher not identified, and date of publication not identified. And if you end up with the interesting thing that has no information at all, not even a title, you would devise a title, and then of course you would have to provide the title, source of title note that you see here in the 588 field. And we'll come back to that and talk about that again in a little bit. So basis for identification with original RDA, the first actual step that we have is something called basis for identification. And so this is where you make some decisions about whether you're doing a comprehensive description, an analytical description, or a hierarchical description. So a comprehensive description is the most common type of description that we do. It's the single book, the single DVD video, the single map. It could be a multi-part set. So it could be a set of, I mean, if you've got print encyclopedias or, some reference set, something like that, or even an integrating resource. So a loose leaf or a website or a database. So those are all going to be comprehensive descriptions. We are describing the manifestation as a whole in a holistic sense. For analytical, we're describing one part of the larger whole. So maybe there is a map that only exists in one book, and it's important for some reason. And so you decide that it makes sense for your users to catalog that map. That then becomes an analytical description, and then you would have a relationship in that bibliographic description that shows that it is part of a whole, the comprehensive description. And then the hierarchical is when we have both the comprehensive and the analytical. So both of these two types of descriptions together in the catalog. So that's all that's happening there. So once you've made that choice, and then we'll go the next slide, sorry. So once you've made that choice, I also want to talk about the instructions, transcribe or record. So for transcribe, we are copying exactly what we see on the resource itself. So it's an evidence-based exercise. We see the evidence in front of us, we transcribe it exactly. And there are certain core elements that are transcription elements, and so we'll talk about those as we meet them. We don't correct our misspellings, we don't omit any words, we don't abbreviate something that maybe we used to long ago, we don't unabbreviate something that appears on the resource in abbreviated form. We can, however, supply punctuation for clarity. Recording, on the other hand, is to copy, but not exactly. So this could be where you use Arabic numerals instead of Roman numerals, or when we take the visual evidence of the resource, such as the content type, and record that, or maybe it's an unpaginated resource, and then we count how many pages there are and provide a count. We're not going to use brackets for that. We're just recording the number because it's what our eyes can tell us. So when you have decided whether you're doing comprehensive or analytical descriptions, then you identify what your preferred source of information is. RDA outlines two, one for resources that are comprised of pages, leaves, sheets, cards, or images thereof, and one for moving images, so which would include video games. And then everything else that is not page, leaf, sheet, or card, or a moving image then falls under this third column where we use whatever looks best. But for books, we're going to prefer the title page. So if there is a title page, that's the preferred source of information that we're going to use. If there is no title page, then we would, in this order, use the cover or dust jacket, a caption, a masthead, which we're really only going to see in serials, a colophon, which we would see in certain, usually juvenile picture books, and also we see the colophon a lot in Central, South American, and European publications. And if all of those are absent, then some other source in the resource as a whole, preferring a formal presentation. So once you have settled on your preferred source of information, even if it isn't the title page, it will then become your de facto title page. So you will treat it as if it were the title page. So every time you see preferred source of information, the same source of the title proper, that's what we're talking about. So that becomes your source from which you will take everything you possibly can. So exhaust the information that you see there before moving on. So here we have a couple of preferred sources that you can see. The first one is a textbook for the Buddhist religion. We see up front the title page, and then behind it the cover. And then over here we've got a special issue, a theme issue of a journal, and it has a title page on it. So it also includes some information about the serial on here, but that doesn't matter for our purposes for this particular presentation. So these would be our preferred sources of information. What we see on here, then we will exhaust in our transcription and our recording. So the title proper, other title information, the edition statement, the first statement of responsibility, the second statement of responsibility, the publisher name, and the place of publication. So all of that information appears on the title page. So we have to record and transcribe all of that from this title page because it's coming from the same source as the title proper. The same over here, this one is missing a statement of responsibility, and that's okay. If there is no statement of responsibility, then you just don't have anything to record. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that if information isn't there, don't agonize over the fact that it's not there. If you don't see it on some other part of the resource, like the cover or the title page verso or something like that, then let it go. Your job is not to like invent information. Your job is to faithfully transcribe and record what we see. That's one of the principles of description set forth in RDA. So other sources of information are, so these are going to be everything other than your title proper. And for all of your core elements, the way in which RDA is worded is going to read like this. Take whatever core element name it is, take this core element from the following sources in order of preference. The same source as the title proper, another source within the resource itself. So that means that if it's not on your title page or de facto title page, then you can go look elsewhere. But if it is, you've got to record or transcribe what you see on that title page. And then if it's not somewhere else within the resource, then you can look somewhere else. And that's usually outside the resource. And so that could be a container, like a slipcase. That could be the publisher's website. So those types of things are permissible. So I mentioned the slipcase container. RDA is sometimes, so it's always a little bit unclear. For media, the container is considered to be part of the resource itself, but for other things, it might not be. So it's always worth kind of checking out what's there in the instructions, in the RDA instructions for clarity. It's been a very long time since I've ever had anything come in a slipcase. So the exceptions to this general way of thinking up here is that for a series, you want to first use the series title page. If there is no series title page, then you start with the same source as the title proper, then another source within the resource itself. For places of publication, prefer the source of the name of the publisher. So there are instances where the place of publication will appear on the title page, but the name of the publisher won't. And you don't find the name of the publisher until you look at the title page verso. So what that means is that you would transcribe that publisher name from the title page verso because it doesn't exist here. And then because of this exception, you would then transcribe the place of publication that you see with or near the name of the publisher. For your copyright dates, for identifiers like the ISBN, the content type, you can use any source that you want. So an ISBN does not have to come from the resource itself. It could come from the publisher's website. Copyright dates are never supplied. They can come from any source. So if you know the copyright date from some other source, you can record it. It does not ever take brackets. And then for the extent, the carrier, the media, we're going to use the evidence that the resource presents. So we'll look at it and record those. So here are some examples of some of the other sources. So we'll start from left to right. We've got a title page verso. And then at the top, we see an example of a running title. Sometimes it'll be on both pages. Sometimes it'll only be on one. And then going down a bit on the far right, we've got a colophon. So the colophon you can see the page numbers. It's either 264 or 164, but it's usually the very last page in the book or near the last page with printing. And then in the middle here, we have the CIP. So generally you want to ignore the CIP. It can be useful, particularly if you have to create an original record, because even though there's CIP, the Library of Congress hasn't created a record, which is rare, but it happens. Or there's nothing available in WorldCat, or you're not a WorldCat member, and so you have to create these on your own. You can certainly use the information that you find in the CIP to do that, but just be very wary about the CIP because they create the CIP from proofs that are submitted to the Library of Congress through the CIP program long before publication has happened. So you would get it when the book is still an idea and not much has even been written. So things can change, but they don't always update that information. So that's why it's really important to be skeptical of the CIP. Title proper. So the title proper is a core element. You have to have the title proper. It is one of the 4 minimum elements that has to be in a bibliographic description. So here we've got 3 different examples. We have the Buddhist religion, we have Minnesota, a different America, and then we have Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves. So in the first example, the Buddhist religion, it's pretty clear what the title proper is and what the other title information is, in part because we can tell by typography. The Buddhist religion is bigger, it's more prominent, it's in the middle. And a tip for you is that not all books have this, but if the book that you're cataloging has a half title page, the half title page almost always bears the title proper, what the creator considers the title proper. So that can be your check if you're ever in doubt as to that. For the second one, Minnesota, a different America, we have that colon there. And so those of us who were raised on AACR2 just see that colon and think subfield B, subtitle, that's got to be a subtitle, a different America, but it actually isn't. And the reason for that is that when we look at it, for one, it's in the same typographical or the same typography, so the weight and everything is the same. And also, we can look at this and say the intent of the creator of this title was not to have it just be Minnesota, and that's it. It was Minnesota, a different America. So that's also something to keep in mind. And then the last one here, we have a possessive in front of the title proper. This is also an example of, so not all title pages are just the one side. They can be, a title proper can span both the verso and the recto, so the whole 2 pages that you see when you open up to that part. And when you have a possessive, it is grammatically linked, so you cannot separate that. And that's why we would transcribe this with the author's name as the first part of the title proper. And then there are other tools that we have in our kit that we can use to provide the actual title of the work here. So, and we'll meet those later. And then last, this is where you would need to make some choices. Capitalization is always an institutional and/or cataloger's choice. Most of us follow Appendix A of RDA, which is straight out of AACR2, which is capitalize the first word of the title proper and any proper nouns. So we can see that here. First word, the, capitalized Buddhist. We can see that here, capitalizing the name and the first word of the title house. Technically, we could probably just do little h in that case, but I went with a capital H just for clarity. And here we have an example of not following Appendix A, rather of transcribing literally what we see in terms of capitalization. So that's your choice, and it's always a good thing to document what that choice is. And don't just say, we're going to follow Appendix A. Give a statement as to why that is the case. Because we won't be here forever, and the people who come after us will want to know. So next we have note on the title proper. So as it currently stands with original RDA, if the title proper comes from an actual title page, then there is no need for a note on the source of the title proper. If, however, there is no title proper on the title page, there's no title page, and we take it from some other source, we have to provide a note. In days of yore, we would give this in a simple 500 field note. However, one major aspect of RDA is structured data. So the more we can make our data structured and give it explicit meaning, the better. This is going to prime our descriptions for linked data, for working better with BibFrame when that ever comes along. And the OLAC has also put in their best practices now that the 588 is the preferred use for this particular note. So 588, first indicator 0. The language that you use doesn't matter. Title from cover, cover title, just a clear statement of where you're seeing this. So there's a question on 11 for Mark's name. Wouldn't it be more user-friendly to have that as an added title subfield I at the head of the title? So that's a good question. So coming back to RDA's instruction, transcribe the title proper. And again, because it's a possessive, because it has that grammatical linkage, it cannot be separated. But we have the 240 field, we have the 246 field, so we'll have some other ways to give simply House of Leaves, and we'll come to that and a bit later in the session. But this is a good example of the way we might have thought of things differently in AACR2 and the way that RDA is presenting, because the again, structured data and not interpreting some of what we see, rather transcribing and faithfully providing the information that we have. So another question, do the same rules apply for books that are written by different authors, but continuing a series like Tom Clancy, where it's not possessive, just an enormous font? So that's a different situation. So in those particular cases, you'll transcribe the title proper that you see, and then the statement of responsibility will still be Tom Clancy, because it's and this has happened with several famous authors who have died, and then somebody else has finished the series, continued those books. The attribution still goes to the person who created it, and then they'll have the actual person who wrote the book will be the second one, the second named author. But the idea here is that Tom Clancy, Marion Zimmer Bradley, Robert Jordan, they all have already created the work, the idea of it. It's just that this other person has finished those novels. So that's what's happening there. That's a great question. Other title information. So other title information we commonly call the subtitle. And in RDA, other title information can only exist in the 245 subfield B. It's the only place it would ever be. It never gets pulled out and used anywhere else, except that you could, under your own judgment, pull it out as a portion of title into a variant title field, a 246 field, if that makes sense, for whatever reason. But otherwise, it lives there, and it is, by definition, super unimportant, super insignificant, bibliographically. The reason we love the subtitle is because a lot of times people give some sort of clever title proper, and then they explain themselves in the other title information or subtitle. So that's why it's really helpful to have it. It is not core, so you don't actually have to transcribe it. So if you have like a backlog of things that are not terribly important, but you just want to get them into your catalog, into your system, that is a method of moving through those quickly, is to just concentrate on the core elements and not worry about non-core elements like the other title information. So and if you are ever in doubt, you can always give it as a note in a 500 field if you're not sure whether it really is a subtitle or not. Symbols and numerals in the title proper. So there's a whole mess of instructions in the Library of Congress PCC policy statement 2.3.6.3. If you are not a subscriber to the RDA toolkit, don't fear, because the policy statements are from the federal government and so aren't copyrighted and are freely available. So you can always go to the toolkit and you can always see those policy statements. So things that, if they occur in one of the first 5 words of the title proper, or one of the first 6 words if the first word is an article. So just not counting the article, if it's in one of those first 5 words, then we would create a 246 and spell out an abbreviation. We would spell out the word "and" when we see a symbol, like an ampersand or a plus or pound for number. Letters and initialisms with punctuation, we will provide a 246 without that punctuation. Arabic numerals, excluding dates, will be given in written form. Roman numerals as a span of dates or as numerals. We'll give them in written form, and then we'll give them again in Arabic. Numbers we will give as Arabic numerals if the user might reasonably search that way. So if the number is written, you do not need to provide a variant for that, unless in your judgment, there's your cataloger's judgment, you think that a user might reasonably search that way. And then misspellings that we have to transcribe, you can give the correction in the 246 field. So remember that it doesn't go the other way. We're not going to give a 246 where we take the word and give it as an ampersand. It's only when it's given as a symbol. So if there are other symbols, other non Latin characters that are used to represent a word, then you would give a 246 to spell that word out, because not everyone is going to know to think that way. The reason for the first 5 words is, and this is where this philosophy comes from, in our older systems, when we would more commonly do title browse searches, the chances of not hitting that particular title after the 6th word would be incredibly rare. So they would appear on your search results screen. In our current discovery age, where there's no such thing as title browse anymore, for most of us anyway, it's probably less of a concern, but still the first 5 words is where we want to go with that. More variant title examples here. So we have that illustrate the last slide. Backroads, ampersand, byways of Minnesota. We're spelling out the word in the second one. 20 centuries and Mount St. Helens. Here we have the Arabic. Here we have it spelled out in English. 1001 nights. Here's an example of where we would give it in Arabic, because we can reasonably assume that a user might search for 1001 nights using 1001. I would probably also give a 246 of 1,000, the word a, even though a is an initial article. That would be where I would break that rule of not using an initial article, because I can bet people will use a in that search. Here we've got the ABCs, and you can see there's punctuation of raising a puppy. And then here we have ABCs of raising a puppy, no punctuation, and is I forget what this now. Oh, what this is saying here is that we do not need to do ABCS omitting the I totally forgot what this is called. Apostrophe. Sorry. So we don't have to do one omitting the apostrophe, because the apostrophe will be stripped for indexing. So that's not a anything to worry about. So this next several slides are going to be examples of title pages and what they would look like as we transcribe them. So here is a book, What the Bleep Do We Know? And as humans, we can look at this and we can easily puzzle this title out and know what it is actually saying. But the actual characters, even though some of them are Latin, a lot of them are scientific or Greek, or mostly Greek, I think. And there's a couple others like the best I could find was a Coptic E for these two E's. There's no way to reproduce this arrow. So you do the best that you can do. So because we are transcribing, you will see that our 245 is also a transcription, and that shows that. And if you are unable to reproduce these are all Unicode characters. So Unicode is accepted in the MARC format, so that's not a problem. And for probably most people, this makes for a great example, and I would probably do this anyway, even if I wasn't doing this as a presentation example, just because I'm a geek that way. But most of us would probably just use what the bleep do we know and have a 500 note that says the title is presented using characters from other alphabets to represent those words. So that's a perfectly acceptable methodology. But from a pure RDA principle of representation type of take on this, the principle of representation is where we get our transcription instructions. So we have transcribed exactly what we see here. And I've added a 246. And I've also added a 240 field here. And the 240 field, which means uniform title, and I've got a 240 because we have a main entry personal name that will be added here. Otherwise, this would be a 130 field. But I've got it here because this is the preferred title of work is something that you, the cataloger, assign. And we only do this when the preferred title is different from the title proper that is presented in the 245 subfield A. So even though the sentiment and the words are the same, the characters are what is different here. And so the 240 is there. The 240 is doing a very specific job. So even though it is identical, except for the punctuation at the end, to what we see in the 246, they're doing very different jobs, the 240 and the 246. And this is one of the things to also keep in mind, that because we are looking at creating structured data, and our MARC tags are part of that structure and are assigning those particular meanings to what the data in those tags are for. That's why these look redundant, but they aren't. I hope that made some sense. For this statement of responsibility, we have it's a core element, the statement of responsibility. And the only part that's core is the first statement of responsibility. And I want to be clear about what the first statement means. The first statement is not the first name. Rather, it's the first statement for agent or agents responsible for the creation of the intellectual or artistic content of the resource. So if you have two co-authors, that is one statement of responsibility, because the responsibility there is the writing, the authorship, and it's two people who are sharing that agency, two people in that one statement of responsibility. So we have two statements of responsibility that appear in this first example, which is coming from the Buddhist religion. We have Richard H. Robinson and Willard L. Johnson. So that's statement of responsibility 1. The second statement of responsibility is the assistants, Catherine Tsai and Shinzen Young. Here for Minnesota, A Different America, there is no statement of responsibility. They didn't even name the editor or editors who edited the papers from this particular conference. And then the last one here, we've already got Mark Danielewski in the title proper, so that's already a first statement of responsibility, so we can actually stop there. Zampano and Johnny Truant are the second and third, technically, statements of responsibility. They are fictitious characters in the novel, but they're on the title page. And again, principle of representation, because they are being presented as agents, we transcribe them as such. So we will have opportunities later to give a note that says these aren't real people. these are characters in the book, but the principle of representation is what allows us to have non-human, legendary, and fictitious characters have access points and be attributed as creators or contributors to works. So we'll see another example of that in a couple of slides later. Here we have Southwestern New Mexico. There's our title proper. We have recorded our statement of responsibility. Note that it starts with the word by, and the word and is present here. All of those words that you see have to be transcribed. So you cannot omit any words. They have to be transcribed. At the head of title, so the top, we also see a corporate body, the New Mexico Bureau of Mines and Mineral Resources, a division of New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology. So when there are never, the only time you can say never with cataloging is that you can never say never. There are always some exceptions out there. So if I ever use an absolute like never, just understand that it's not an absolute never, it's a mostly never. So it's almost always consistently true that when a corporate body appears at the head of the title, that means the corporate body has some agency in the creation of the content. When the corporate body name appears at the foot of the title, so down here somewhere, then that is almost always an indication that their role is only one of publishing. So that's a very consistent type of presentation in publishing that we've seen forever. I'm sure there is an example of that not being true somewhere many times, but generally speaking, that is something you can rely on. So when you see a corporate body at the head of the title, that is a major clue that that corporate body has agency and that they should be given a statement of responsibility in the 245C. Here we have an editor. So we have transcribed everything that we see in the statement of responsibility. This certainly caused a lot of consternation when RDA was first introduced, the idea that we would transcribe more than just the name and maybe the by statement. But here we have edited by Elaine Svenonius, Graduate School of Library and Information Science, University of California, Los Angeles, California. So every single word that we see here on the title page in the statement of responsibility has been faithfully transcribed in our description. And so there should probably be a dog ear symbol here. There is an option in RDA that if you don't want to do that, you can just do the names and omit the affiliations. The argument I would make against that is that when this information appears in the bibliographic record. It really is helpful when you are trying to reconcile authority name, because sometimes people write in multiple different disciplines. And so that can be a really helpful indication if we know that this person is affiliated with that institution and they're writing on library science, and then they also write science fiction, that we can connect them as being the same person. So it's a very helpful thing, not only for other catalogers, but it could be useful to users as well. Here we have a title page with a statement of responsibility that has two names and their affiliations. And when you look at this, you would rightfully think that they were creators of the content. But on the front cover, we can see their names with the word editors below that. So what you are allowed to do is to add clarity to the statement of responsibility when necessary. So here we've transcribed Richard Ray, Ed D, ATC, Hope College, yada, 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 Diane M, Wiesa Bjornstall, yada, 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 and then square brackets editors. So I've used what I see. So I'm recording what I see, taking what I see on the front cover, adding it to the statement of responsibility for clarity. You could alternatively just start the 245C with, in square brackets, edited by. So either one is totally fine. The point here is that we want to also faithfully represent the reality that's happening. They're not creators, they're actually editors. So that's a helpful thing to do, which also raises the question of, if we go back to Zampano and Johnny Truant, could we put brackets there? I don't think that we need to. You could. I don't think that we need to. I think we can take care of that with a note. It's fiction, so that part makes it easy. This is nonfiction, so I think it's more important to put that up front, that these are editors. Here is an example of a non-human, legendary, or fictitious character, is our friend Miss Piggy. So the title page, Miss Piggy's Guide to Life by Miss Piggy, as told to Henry Beard. So we all know Miss Piggy did not actually write anything or even say anything, that Henry Beard made all of this up. So he's the real creator, but this is being presented as if Miss Piggy is the creator of the content, even though she didn't write it. Henry Beard wrote what Miss Piggy told to him. That's the fantasy, and we are going to let that fantasy live. So here we have Miss Piggy in a 100 field because she is attributed as the creator. And this is the principle of representation, representing the resource the way in which it represents itself. It is representing itself as being written or the content created by Miss Piggy. It's the same as an interview where the person being interviewed would be attributed as the main creator, right? So that's what's happening here. This is a result of the functional requirements for authority data on which original RDA is in part based. So this is why you can have the various Muppets as actors in the movies. This is why Lassie can be an actor in the television show. This is why in Free Willy, Keiko can be have a access point as an actor. This is why, oh, I can't remember. Spot, I cannot remember. Hillary Clinton wrote a book about as if the first cat had written it, and I think Barbara Bush also did one with the dogs, their dogs as the authors. So those are options that you can use. Here, coming back to Danielewski's House of Leaves, we can see that we have the main entry access point as Danielewski using his authorized access point from the name authority file. We have also added Zampano and Johnny Truant, and you can see Johnny Truant has fictitious character in the subfield C. Zampano does not. So this is still an option in the creation of an authority record and an access point for fictitious, legendary, non-human characters. You may choose to use the attribution, the qualifier fictitious character, or you can decide not to. So we can also see this with Miss Piggy does not say fictitious character. It could. So there's still no best practices for this yet. In some people are very adamant that they should always bear the subfield C fictitious character. Others are less inclined to that, like just doing it when it's really necessary, because Zampano, Johnny Truant, that would make sense. Miss Piggy, do we really need it? I mean, everyone knows who Miss Piggy is, right? At least right now. But in 100 years, I think the Muppets will still be around. But you never know. Here's another example of a possessive where we would want a preferred title. So Julius E. Wolfe Jr.'s Lake Superior Shipwrecks. So we have transcribed that from the title proper. I know that's a little blurry, but we've got the cover there to make it a little easier to see. And we have added a preferred title for work, which is just the portion of the title that does not include the possessive. So in this particular case, because even though the possessive is part of the title proper, the creator's name appears again, so it has to be transcribed.
Wait, Bobby, before you continue, there is a question about
Oh.
page 20. Or slide 20.
Sorry, thank you. I missed that. Would you have to add a note stating that you got the editor from the cover? That's a great question, Amy. No, because the brackets tell us that it's not coming from that source of information. So the only time we have to state a source is for the title proper. Everything else will be indicated using brackets. Trying to think where I think I have a slide on this or a place to talk about this, but I'll just talk about it now. So there are two options in RDA for how we deal with information that does not come from the source of information, usually the resource itself. In this case, editors is coming from the resource itself because it is on the cover. However, because it is not appearing on the title page, hence the brackets. But the brackets are the cue here that it is not present on the source from which this was transcribed. Okay, so that's one. So this does not mean, for example, if the statement of responsibility does not exist on the title page and it exists instead on the cover, that you would give the statement of responsibility in brackets because it's not on the title page. That's not true. So if we go back to here, if the statement of responsibility, we would take it from the same source as the title proper. If it's not there, then we can go to another source within the resource itself. So we can go to the cover and we can transcribe what we see. we're good. We don't have to worry about that, right? But if there is information such as the name of the publisher that appears nowhere in the book, but you know it for through some other means, then you would provide that publisher name in square brackets or the place of publication in square brackets. You don't have to say where it came from. The only thing we have to say, where did it come from, is the source of the title. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Here we have a previously published title, so a dictionary of the Ojibwe language. So this is the original. Then there is a later publication where the title, it's the same work, but the title has been changed to a more contemporary spelling of Ojibwe, a dictionary of the Ojibwe language. So again, we transcribe what we see for the title proper, but because this was previously published under a title with Ojibwe with a different spelling, that original title will become our preferred title of work, and that will go in the 240 field. So, check our time here. Edition and manifestation. The concept of manifestation in the IFLA LRM being the library reference model that was developed by IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations. The LRM is the harmonization of the functional requirements theoretical models. So Ferber, Frad, and Frazad. So the bibliographic, authority, and subject. And in there, manifestation is a set of carriers capturing one or more expressions. So the print book, the DVD, the Blu-ray, these are all manifestations of expressions, right? In publisher speak, the word edition could be first edition, revised edition, publisher's name edition, but they also often use it as being synonymous with manifestation. So they'll say edition, but what they really mean in our cataloging language is what we would call a manifestation. So this edition published in cooperation with so-and-so. What they really mean is this manifestation. It's not an actual edition statement. So this is something to just be mindful of when you see that word edition. Usually on the title page verso is where we would see that, to just think about the meaning that's being used there. And the word edition, at least in most Indo-European languages, also has this same lack of clarity. So if you're doing particularly any of the Germanic languages, they have a couple of different words that can all mean the same thing, and it gets very frustrating. So edition statement, this should be pretty straightforward. If there is an edition statement, transcribe what you see. If there are multiple edition statements, the 250 field has been repeatable for a number of years now. So just make a new 250 field with the other edition statement. You don't have to smush these into one field the way we used to have to do that. Don't change anything, just record exactly what you see. So if it says third edition on the piece, 3RD, then transcribe it. If they abbreviate the word edition, you transcribe it that way. Edition statements often appear particularly for fiction, but also in some cases nonfiction, on the title page verso. That's the most common place we see it. Sometimes it's pretty common to see it at the very bottom of the title page verso or smack in the middle. And I know you can't see what's going on there, but this one is smack in the middle. Sometimes it's slightly hidden, sometimes it's more prominent. So you do have to be kind of intentional to scan through that title page verso and find these addition statements. Remember, don't use an addition statement that appears in CIP. That is always, CIP information is always considered to be not part of the resource itself. Here we've got Warner Books edition, we've transcribed it. Here we see 2009 Del Rey trade paperback edition. Here we see first edition, February 2016, first edition, August 2016. So it is very common for the date of publication to be given in the same line as the edition statement, particularly for fiction. So you have to parse that information. That 2009, that February 2016, August 2016, these are not part of the edition statement. So just transcribe only the edition statement part, and then know that you have right next to it, right here, and right here, an explicit date of publication, and we will put that into our publication date field in just a few minutes. Production statement, this is used only for unpublished materials. The date is the only core element, and just give the date as it appears. So we see on this master's thesis, which is a print master's thesis, so that is an unpublished form, May 2011. So we record May 2011. Again, this goes back to past practice where in AACR2 times, we would only record the year, but principle of representation, transcribing what we see, May 2011 is what we see, so May 2011 is what we transcribe. Optionally, if there is a place and a name associated with it, you can give that, but it's not necessary and could make things a bit ambiguous. The most, if you're an academic institution with graduate that grants graduate degrees, then you would probably run into this situation with theses and other capstones that you would end up cataloging for your collection. Just keep in mind that anything that is electronic is by definition published. So any EDTs, electronic theses and dissertations, those are considered published because they're electronic. This is only when it's in print form, analog form, that we would consider this unpublished. For published resources, the core elements are the place, the publisher name, and the date of publication. Most of the time now, our publication dates don't exist. We only see copyright dates, and so we have to use that copyright date to infer a date of publication. So here we see Belmont, California, because that's what we see on the title page. We have Wadsworth Publishing Company. This is what we transcribe. You also see here a division of Wadsworth Inc. That is not part of the publisher name, so you do not need to transcribe that. So we see this a lot because there really are only 5 major publishing companies out there. They have bought up all the rest. So unless it's a very small press or a university press, it's one of those big ones, right? So you'll see Simon & Schuster, a member of the Penguin family, or I don't know who actually owns it anymore, but you'll see those types of taglines after the publisher name, or imprint name, and imprints are publishers. don't worry about that piece. It's just the name of the publisher or imprint, the main one that is that you would worry about. Here we've just used the year 2000, summer 2000. I was really kind of iffy on whether, I mean, technically I probably should use summer here because it's what we see, but it's not a month. And so I was just uncertain, and judgment call. So, you know, when you're uncertain, go with, you know, err on the side of safety, I guess I would say. Dates dates can feel problematic, but don't agonize over them. There are a number of different ways that we can deal with dates. They're typically only given as years, but if they appear as a month or as a month and day, transcribe what you see. That can actually be pretty helpful. There are certain publications where I have seen one manifestation is May 19th, 2015, and then another revision comes out and it's May 21st, 2019, something like that. So those dates actually matter, and that's why we want to record them. Otherwise, they're going to end up as mergers in WorldCat, because if you only have the year and there's nothing to make them different, they will get merged when in fact they are different. So this is why being precise with your dates is really important. The policy statement from Library of Congress is to supply an estimate whenever possible, and there's a number of different ways that you can do this. As a very last resort, you can use the printing date and say not before the printing date. You can look through, if they've got bibliographic citations, you can look through those and find the most recent published citation date and say not before that date. So because we would know it could not have been published before the most recent citation that you find in the bibliography. You can say between this date and that date, and it can be like 100 years or 200 years, so it really doesn't matter the distance between those dates. So do the best that you can do. If all other options fail, you can always use in brackets date of publication not identified, but only if it's just impossible to estimate a date. So okay. Here are some date examples with our edition statements. For this first one, we only have a copyright date of 1993. So we will infer a pub date of 1993, and we're showing it is inferred and supplied because we have the square brackets. So anytime you supply information that doesn't exist, you use square brackets. You could also not use square brackets and give a 500 note that says date of publication inferred from copyright date. That is also acceptable, but that's a lot of work. And the Library of Congress is all about efficiency. This is their mechanism for efficiency, and it's pretty common. We've been doing this for decades upon decades, to use the brackets to show that it doesn't exist on the resource itself. Here's 2009 next to our edition statement, so we have transcribed that. Here's February 2016. So I know that most people would just put 2016, and that's probably suffices, but from, again, a principle of representation and transcribing what we see, February 2016 is what we see. So that's what we transcribe. Same for this one down here. For the copyright date, only the most recent copyright date, the one that applies to the current manifestation, that's what you provide. That's what you record. So copyright symbol 1982. So that's the most recent date we see over here. You don't need a space between the symbol and the year. And if you cannot reproduce the symbol, the word copyright is totally fine. So you can just use the word copyright as well. That uses a 264 field with the second indicator 4. The only subfield that's valid is subfield C. Only the most recent copyright date. That's it. You will find sometimes that you get a new version of a book, and the only thing that's different about it is that there's a new foreword or a new introduction or something like that, or book club guidance added to the back of the book, and that will have a different, newer copyright date. That is the new copyright date that's the most recent copyright date, and what you would put in the 264. That also means you have a new manifestation and would need to create a new bibliographic record. In official RDA speak, that would be an aggregate, because you've got the work and this other thing, the introduction, the book club questions, whatever it is. It constitutes, either way, in either version of RDA, it constitutes a new manifestation, so it requires a new bibliographic record. In very, very rare circumstances, probably only necessary in special collections cataloging, you might want, and I'm just really emphasizing the maybe and might here, you might want multiple copyright dates. In this particular case, we have The Secret Garden with two very famous people, Frances Hodgson Burnett and Tasha Tudor. So the illustrations, and this is particularly true with children's materials, where the famous illustrator and the famous writer, the rights to the content that was created are owned differently, and that's what we see here. So this book was published in 1962. The copyright renewal shows 1962. The this out of the way. The illustrations were what was the copyright date was renewed, 1962. The text was renewed in 1938. So we have a pub date of 1962 that's been inferred. We have an illustrations copyright date of 1962 and a text copyright date of 1938. So this is a possibility that you might explore if it's important, if it's necessary for your users, again, under very special circumstances. But I just wanted you to know it's possible, and this is where your subfield 3 comes in really handy, because you can give the label for what's happening there. Okay, so watch your time because we're coming up on break time. Series statement. Again, if there is a series title page, you want to use that title page as the source for the series title. If there is no series title page, then use the title page, use some other source within the resource itself. If perchance the series statement comes from outside the resource, just use the square brackets. You don't need to provide a note on the source of the series title proper. So here we have an example with a series title page. we just transcribe the series title itself. Remember to include the initial article. So there are 3 places in a bibliographic record where we can include initial articles. The 245 subfield A, the 490 subfield A, and then in any notes 500, 5 whatever, 5xx fields, those are permissible. In all other fields, you will always omit initial articles. And this will become very important when we get to constructing access points for works and expressions. So 490, transcribe the title proper. Do not transcribe the statement of responsibility. It is an option, but it's not something that we have done in North American cataloging historically, and it's something that was there when RDA was first published, and they pulled back on that. So here if there is numbering, the numbering goes in subfield V. Transcribe what you see. So if volume is spelled out, spell it out. If it's abbreviated as VOL, abbreviated as VOL. So this is still a transcription area. Transcribe exactly as presented. No, don't unabbreviate anything that is abbreviated on the source, and don't abbreviate something that is not abbreviated. We will use abbreviations in the access points when we put it into the 8xx field. The identifier for the manifestation. Typically for books, we've got an ISBN. Remember that the ISBN didn't come about until the very late 1960s, I think it was. And so it's not prominent until we start seeing, until the 1970s in published books. If there is no ISBN, don't agonize over that. We only record the numbers, so we will omit the letters ISBN, which are actually part of the identifier. We will omit the hyphens. And a fun fact is that the X, which only occurs at the end of an ISBN, is in fact the Roman numeral 10, not the letter X. So now you know. Okay. I think this is a good stopping point. So we will, it's 11:32, and we'll take a 15-minute break, and 15 minutes is what we wanted, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back at 11:45-ish. There it is. Thanks. Okay, so some definitions. First is monograph or monographic. That is any non-serial publication that is complete in one part or a finite number of parts, like a set. Media type. This is an RDA vocabulary value for a mediation device. This is what will go in the 337 field. And then we have carrier type, which is also a vocabulary value from RDA for the storage medium and housing. Whenever you see these content carrier and media types in a bibliographic record, those are just vocabulary terms. They do not indicate that the bibliographic record has been created using or following RDA guidelines. It's just that they are making use of the vocabulary terms. Extent, by extent, we mean the statement expressing the number and unit type. So the unit will be a component of the manifestation that names the carrier. So it's a manifestation attribute that names the carrier. We will use the carrier vocabulary value for the unit. And a subunit is the analytical component of the unit. So one video disc, and then in parentheses, you might have the runtime, you might have that it's, yeah, we're talking about books though, so that's not a good example. You might have one volume unpaged. That's a really good example. So with books, we don't actually tend to make use of the unit. We go directly to the subunit. So we'll see examples of that as we move forward. The media type is actually something that I think is not a core element, if I remember correctly. But we tend to use it. It's and provide it. It's easily provided. If you are a OCLC member using Connection client, or I'm very unfamiliar with Record Manager, but Connection client in particular has a macro that will just create these for you, and you don't have to worry about them. But the media type gives a general type of device needed for accessing the content of the manifestation. For books, it's going to be unmediated. So even if you need glasses, that's still unmediated for the book itself. However, we do have books that are on microfilm or microfiche, so you might need the microform media type for that, and they may be ebooks, and so you would need the computer for that. The carrier type, this is going to be the storage medium. For most books, that's going to be volume. So once you've chosen your media type, then you have a very narrow set of choices for your carrier type. The carrier type will be carried forward as the unit term. For books, we use volume. You could have something that is unbound, and then you would use sheet because it hasn't been, so volume means that it's been bound. Sheet will be unbound. There could be cards, there could be it could be a roll, you could have a scroll. So all of those things are possible. Volume is the most common one that we're going to run into for books. The content carrier and media type terms, as I said, they tend to go together, and the media type is not core, but we tend to always include it. The mark codes terms in subfield B are not necessary, but again, we tend to include it, and that's because the macro in Connection Client does all of that for us. So if you can rely on that macro, that is your best choice because it doesn't misspell things, and these are attributes that will be useful in a linked data environment. So it's particularly important to make sure that we don't misspell them. So extent, here are some examples: 1 sheet, 15 sheets, plural. So we'll take that term that we had from the carrier type that will be singular in that particular mark field, and then we will tell the user how many we have, and we will make that noun agree with the number. So 1 sheet, singular, 15 sheets, plural, 52 cards. We can even say 25 identical leaves. So there are adjectives that we can use now and again. For the most part, we will skip the unit and go directly to the subunit. So this is what you're really used to seeing, is the extent of pagination, and often we have more than one numerical run, so usually a Roman numeraled run and then an Arabic numeraled run. So here we've got 13, 254 pages. Here we have 182 pages, 8 unnumbered pages of plates. Remember that plates are not illustrations. Plates are the heavy clay content paper. Plates often bear illustrations. They don't have to, but typically they're used for a special printing process. We can use the word approximately, so approximately 92 unnumbered pages. So we have provided the fact that it is both unnumbered and that we've got an estimate there. You could alternatively say 1 volumes. This is where we are using the unit, and then in parentheses, the subunit, say approximately 92 unnumbered pages. If you have more than 1 volume, you have to use the unit. So 2 volumes, and then in parentheses, give whatever is happening there. So in this case, the 2 volumes are paginated consecutively. So we've got 35.7 pages, Roman, 810 Arabic. Here we have 4 volumes, which are each paginated separately. And so you may, in a comma separated list, show those paginations there. For juvenile resources for picture books, the Library of Congress prefers using 1 volume, parentheses, unnumbered. That is perfectly, or unpaged, I think. That is perfectly acceptable. However, and I've had a number of librarians who work with children mention this before. It's not useful to the user because a lot of children will have an assignment to find a book on a topic either of their choice or that has been assigned that is at least X number of pages, and the bibliographic record that says 1 volume unpaged is not useful. So if you can take an extra minute and approximate, that's really helpful for the children. Pages, leaves, sheets, and pagination. So a page is something that has or could have printing on both sides. So we all know that sometimes the verso side, when you go to a new chapter, if that previous chapter ended like at the half page, there we won't start a new page, a new chapter over here. We'll start it on the recto, right? A leaf has printing only on the recto side of the book. Plate, again, is that specially coated paper that's usually shiny because it's clay heavy. It'll be thick and it's used for plate printing. And then pagination, we're referring to the page numbers that occur somewhere top bottom corner or top bottom center is usually where we see those. And then the image here shows what the Latin terms are for when we open a book and look. So the verso is what we see on the right side, and the recto is what we see on the verso is what we see on the left side, and recto is what we see on the right side. I'm very right and left challenged, so sorry about that. Dimensions, sorry.
Bobby, before we go, there's a question about page 40.
Gosh, I am not seeing these questions. I don't know why. They sneak in, sorry. Does the same apply to some mangas that may not have page numbers? Yes. So I will say for there is a best practices document from the comics and fiction roundtable that is really, really helpful, that will talk about that. But anything that you catalog that does not have page numbers, then you would either use the one volume unpaged, or you can count them and then give an approximation. Absolutely. Dimensions record the height of the volume from, put it in reading position and just measure top to bottom. Don't record the actual measurement, rather round up to the next whole centimeter. So if the actual measurement is 22.3, we will record 23 centimeters. If the width is either less than half the height or greater than the height, then we will record both the height and the width. So just do both measurements, measurement 1 with an X space the second measurement, and then followed by the units. The other thing is that the 23 here and the CM here, these are words, and so should have a space in between them. Don't, like in mathematics, we might not use the space there when we're recording something, but here we need that space. Here we have an example of a pamphlet or sheet. So the 300 field is one sheet. We have illustrations, portraits, color, and the measurements here show that it is 14 centimeters high, 91 centimeters, and it's complete from end to end unfolded presentation. And then in parentheses, we can give the folded dimensions. So folded to 14 by 23 centimeters. So this would be an example of the width being more than half the height. Okay, I think we're going to make our time here. I'm always a little worried about that. So that kind of concludes the so in the bottom here, I didn't mention this, but I have a in the bottom of the slide, if we're talking about manifestations, I have that describing manifestations there. We're going to now move into works and expressions. On the left side, we've got I have selected attributes that are core elements for works and expressions. So core elements for a work include the preferred title for work and the form of work. These are two attributes that we would see or make use of sometimes in a bibliographic record. The other core elements for works we're only going to see in authority records, so I did not include them here. The same for expression. There are certain attributes that would only be used in the authority record for an expression. In a bibliographic record, we're going to have the content type and the language of expression. On the right side, I have examples to demonstrate that. So the 240 field is an example. 130 is another type of example where we have the preferred title for work. The form of work will appear in a 380 field. So this is not terribly common for most books, but we're starting to see this more and more. Textbooks, open educational resources, graphic novels, science fiction, romance fiction, poetry. So in particular for literature, for graphic novels, for certain specialized books like textbooks, like OER, we will see more often these 380 fields with either one or more of them that provide a term for the form of work. Preferably, we want to use a term from a controlled vocabulary. The Library of Congress Genre Form Terms List, LCGFT, which is identified here in the subfield 2, is a really great resource that is freely available on the Library of Congress's website. If you subscribe to ClassWeb, it's also accessible there. With the expression, the content type that we record in the 336 field, that is an expression attribute. The language of expression can be recorded in a number of different places. One place would occur when we give the after following the preferred title of work in the 240 field or the 130 field. We can have a subfield L that provides the language of the expression. We do this for translations. We code the fixed field in the MARC record with the language of the content, whatever language that might be. Here, the example is the code for French. And then in the 041 field, we would do this when we have, for example, a translation. So here we're showing that the language of the content is English. The subfield H is telling us that it was translated from German, German being the original language. So this 041 would match up with this 240 right here. The content type is a core attribute for an expression. There is a list of terms for it is encoded in the 336 field, and you can see that from the value list at this URL right here. It's also available in RDA as well. Use any term that is applicable from table 6.9 in RDA or from the value list right here. Books make use of the text content term. We also will often see still image, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So use as many content type terms as are necessary. Keep in mind that we are talking about primary content. We are not talking about supplementary content that is used to support the primary content. So a book with illustrations should not have still image, but a book that is primarily illustrated, and the point of the book is those illustrations. Think of an art catalog, think of a juvenile picture book, then we would want to use still image. So that's an important thing to also keep in mind. Content, media, and carrier types. Again, your macro and connection client will create these for you. So that's just a really handy thing to do at the end of creating an original description. If you see something in a bibliographic record that is clearly wrong, by all means, fix it. You will be doing all of us a favor. Here we've got an example where we have 2 336 fields. Again, this could be because there's still image. This could be an art exhibition catalog. It could be a graphic novel. And the order in which you put multiple terms from the same vocabulary, like if you have multiple content terms or multiple carrier terms or multiple media terms, the order doesn't matter. Put them in whatever order makes sense, that the first order that comes to your mind, put them in alphabetical order. I tend to put them into what I consider to be the priority order. So if I'm cataloging in exhibition catalog or graphic novel, I'm going to put still image first, just because it is primarily graphic in nature. And then I'll follow it with text, but the order really doesn't matter. I wanted to point out OCLC Ask QC office hours. QC is the quality control unit. They do these great sessions twice a month, and they record them, and all the recordings are available. So either one of these links, when you go to the real slides, you can access those links. will take you to these. May 2020, they talk about the 3XX fields, excuse me, the 3XX fields, beyond just content carrier and media type terms. There's a whole mess of 3XX fields. If you do video cataloging, you're well aware of how many there are that show up, but they talk about these and what they're for and why we have them. There's a newer one from October that talks specifically about the 334 mode of issuance and the 387 representative expression. Representative expression is something that is part of official RDA. So that particular recording can give you maybe a heads up on some things that are coming. Summarization of the content. So this is not something that traditionally we have done very much of for books outside of fiction. However, it's become more prominent in part because we are getting more metadata from our publishers in the initial CIP records that are created. And it's just easy to go and copy and paste from the publisher's website and pop these into a 520 field. So there are two areas that really help users find resources that they need, and there's evidence-based research to back up both of these claims. The first one is summarization of the content, the summary note, and the table of contents. The second one is subject headings themselves. So both of those elements in a bibliographic record are actually key to users finding resources that they need. The children's and young adult cataloging manual has a really great worksheet, C36 summaries, and this link will take you right there. It just gives you a whole bunch of examples for how to create an objective summary. While it is geared toward juvenile literature, it works for any kind of literature. So I really encourage you to go and take a look at that. So here's an example for this particular textbook. It is, and remember that the summary note doesn't even have to be a full sentence. It can be a phrase. So you can omit the subject. The fewer words, actually, the better. Just make sure that they are keyword rich. That's what will get users to these resources. I'm actually currently working on a presentation for using AI as a tool for cataloging, not to do cataloging, but as a tool. One of the things that I have found is that I can create a specific chat, and I gave it parameters, and then I can pop in a big chunky publisher paragraph that's all full of superlatives and things like that, and it gives back to me something that looks like this. So something that is reduced to a sentence or two and is free of, and is mostly objective. So that's been working really well. So if that's of interest, that could be a really useful tool. I have another idea for using AI as a tool later on that I'll share with you when we get there. For illustrative content, so illustrative content these are illustrations that are designed to support the primary content of the resource. So this would not be a book that is images of art from major painters or an art exhibition catalog. We'll still use illustrations in the 300. That just, it makes sense. But the idea here is that illustrative content, which goes in the 300 subfield B, is only meant to be used for illustrations that support the primary content. If there's literally only one, use the singular. Most of the time we'll use the plural of that. As an alternative, we may, in addition to the word illustration or illustrations, use one or more of these specific types. If we only have one specific type, we can just omit the word illustrations and go right to that specific type. A couple of caveats here is that charts, even though it's in here as illustrative content, charts are not graphs, and you can see graphs is a word that we have. So a pie chart is a graph. It is not a chart. A chart is like the periodic table of elements. It's something that's big that you hang on the wall. So a chart in a book would be something that is folded. It would be a poster that you would pull out, or that would be in a pocket or something like that. So just be mindful of that. The other one is photographs, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. So in the 300 subfield B, it would look like this. There is an option for you to provide the number of said illustration types if it is readily ascertainable and you deemed it to be important. You could certainly do it. I've never actually seen this happen in practice, but it's a thing you could do. Illustrations versus photographs. So this is something that in particular when you're first teaching this stuff to students, that is sometimes difficult to grasp. But those of us who have been doing this for a long time know that the image that we see on the left, even though it was made with a camera, even though it's technically it's a photographic image, we would call this an illustration in cataloging terms. When we describe it, it's an illustration. The one on the right side that I'm holding in my hand is an actual photograph because it's on photo paper. And a photograph is really only going to exist in a scrapbook. If it's in a published book, that would be probably a really expensive book and being held by those little corners. So somebody would have to go in and add those things. And anything that you can make with a keyboard, like a table or something that is not illustrative content, that's simply text, unless you're making ASCII art. Now, in the illustrations fixed field, the ILLS, there is a code O for photographs. And you can use that O if the photographic reproductions, so I'm quoting here from the bibliographic formats and standards, if photographic reproductions, which would commonly be represented as illustrative content in field 300 subfield B, if the photographic illustrations are of minor importance, code A may be used. So for if you've got a book of Ansel Adams photography, technically it's illustrations, you could use photographs, absolutely. So this is kind of a change that has happened in recent time. Color content. If there is color present, use the word color. Keep in mind, I'm going to go back here. Illustrative content is a independent attribute of color content. They are separate. So the word color is never an abbreviation for illustrations. It is completely separate. There are some optional examples where you could still say color illustrations. That is not the way that we want to do structured data. There are books that contain color that do not have illustrations either. So it's possible to have just color and not have the word illustrations. Americans are going to spell it without the U. The rest of the world will use the U. If you are editing something and it's spelled in English rather than American, that's fine. Don't change it. If the content is black and white or grayscale, you do not need to use any term unless you feel that it is important. The official RDA terms are monochrome and polychrome. So if it has color, polychrome is the term that actually gets used, but we tend to use the word color. Do not use parentheses like some color. Do not use chiefly color. Just the word color is all that we need. We don't need to say how much. We don't need to say anything other than color is present. So that's something that is tied up in past practice from AACR2 to move away from. Award notes: if specific awards are of importance to your users, by all means, record them. You do not need to like fuss with any of this. Just record what you see, give the award name and the date. The order doesn't matter, the order that you use. So make some determination on that. So for the color question, in cases of a microform that is black and white of a color thing, how does that get represented? That's a great question. So for a black and white microform, that is a different manifestation of that and because it lacks the color, it will be a different expression as well. So expression is a color attribute. So if you have a book that has illustrations, and so color is one expression, uncolored is a different expression. And so those would be then two different manifestations as well that get described. The description of so there's a couple different ways to catalog microfilm. There is, but from a pure RDA perspective, you would have X number of microform for your unit, right? And then you would have either monochrome in subfield B of the 300 or no terms. You could add a note that says that the original had color, or the original print had color, but the whole idea with the work expression manifestation item, the WEMI, and the LRM, is that the user would see the relationship between these manifestations and be able to see that. But most of us don't have all of these manifestations, so you can certainly add a note if that's important. And John, the 586, I would not have been able to come up with that, but I know that there are some other fields that help explain some of those things. So describing the work, the title of the work, we've already met this in the 240 a number of times, but this is going to be a little more formal. This is a core attribute for the work. In most instances, when we have a bibliographic record and the title proper is identical to the preferred title for work, we do not use a 240 field. So it's inferred by its absence. However, when that is not the case, we need to use the 240. We will omit initial articles in the 240 field. In this particular example that we see, the title proper is Sisters and Saints, Women in American Religion is the subtitle. And then we see on the title page verso that this was first published in hardcover as Women in American Religion in 2000. So the original title of this book was Women and American Religion, and therefore we will need to give it a 240 field to identify that this is a new manifestation of this particular work, and this particular manifestation has a different title proper than the actual work. Sometimes there will be a simultaneous publication and or translation. Here we have Bremer's The Homes of the New World, which was simultaneously published in Swedish, I think. And yep, Swedish. And so we have the Swedish title here. Here we have the Swedish title again with the language of the expression and subfield L. So so this one is pretty easy to figure out because the author is Swedish. So going with the Swedish is pretty clear cut. But if you had a question as to which one to go with for the 240 field, you just pick one, or you pick the first one that comes across your desk. So that's really how that actually works. Here we have an example of typography and intent. So the title page is a photographic guide to some common wasps and bees of Minnesota. The half title page, which if you remember I said earlier, if there's a half title page, it will often give you an indication of what the intended title proper is. And that half title page here says Wasps and Bees of Minnesota. We can also see on the spine, Wasps and Bees of Minnesota. And in the typographic presentation, Wasps and Bees is much more prominent. So all of this can give us a author's intent that Wasps and Bees of Minnesota is really kind of where we're going with this. So remember that the preferred title of work is ultimately a creation of the cataloger. It is based on evidence, but it is not a transcription. It is the creation of the cataloger. So in this particular case, I made the decision based on the evidence that I'm presenting here to you that Wasps and Bees of Minnesota is the intended preferred title. And so I have presented it that way in the 240 field. You could also, in addition, have a 246 portion of title, Wasps and Bees of Minnesota. Here we've got another example of previously published as. So the title here is A Guide to F. Scott Fitzgerald's St. Paul. So this is what we have transcribed in our 245 title proper, but we see on the title page verso is originally published as F. Scott Fitzgerald in Minnesota. So we have to give that 240 field here, F. Scott Fitzgerald in Minnesota, so that these different manifestations will connect under this work title. Name elements. So there are the form of the name for persons or bodies, any agent that you find in the name authority file. We will provide and usually a 100 for the primary creator, and then a 700 for second, third, fourth named creators, and any contributors. Contributors may only be in a 7XX field. And likewise for corporate bodies, 110, 710, the same the same shebang. What we're focusing on here is the subfield E, so the relationship designators. And I think I've got another slide coming up about the relationship designators, but subfield E, it's coming from Appendix I, and I have some more information on that in just a few minutes. Unstructured relationships, these are notes. So an unstructured relationship is just free text, things that make sense to humans, but to the computer is just words and has absolutely no meaning. So here, an unstructured relationship, I'm just making the note and I'm recording what I see. So we see first published in hardcover as Women in American Religion, parentheses 2000, and that's what I recorded. You could, if you wanted to, reword this, reorient this. The original title, Women in American Religion, published in 2000, you could say that. It doesn't matter. It's just easier to record what we see and not have to worry about rearranging things. So this is acceptable. It's not necessary, but it's acceptable to add these notes. Table of contents. So this is another form of unstructured relationships. So the chapters within the resource have a relationship to the resource itself. So this gets into deep into RDA theory, but the first example is just showing a normal set of chapter titles from the Buddhist religion textbook. The second example is showing the these are individual works in their own right. So they are the papers that are contained in the special theme issue, Minnesota, A Different America. And you can see they are encoded with subfield T for the title, subfield R for the statement of responsibility. And this is where AI tools can also be helpful. So if you've got a long table of contents, I've been able to successfully train a specific chat that when I throw in either an image or the text of table of contents, it will spit it back out at me in this form or in this form. So it will remove section headers and page numbers and chapter numbers and all of that. So it can be a real time saver for big, long tables of contents. Checking our time here. Yeah, so a few more slides. So I'm going to go into the Q&A just a little bit, but we're almost done. Constructing relationship access points. So I really wanted to end this on talking about relationships and two other works and expressions in particular. So I've got a couple of examples to help illustrate that. So this one is talking about how we construct a relationship for using access points. 6.27 RDA gives you the specific instructions for creating these access points, in particular for works created by one person or two or more persons or for compilations. So the first example here, we've got Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 A Space Odyssey. You can see we're using the authorized access point from the name authority file, AAP, authorized access point. So he's the only creator, but the instructions are identical if you've got two or more creators. You just use the first named in those cases. So we use the AAP of the first named creator and the preferred title of work. Typically, this is the title proper. As we saw in some previous slides, it could be the earlier title. Here we've got an example, Engineering Response to Global Climate Change. The second edition of this book had a slightly different title, and it's an edited volume of papers. So hence the X30 instead of a 240 or 100, sorry. Here we've got the motion picture 2001: A Space Odyssey motion picture. So all of our moving image works will always be entered as if they were a compilation. And then here we've got a couple of examples of expressions. The first one is Hermann Hesse's Glas Perlenspiel, translated into English. So we know this from the subfield L. Here we've got the parallel expressions. So text and audio are different expressions of the same work. They're not versions. They're not adaptations. Spoken word is just a different expression. And here we've got Hunger Games, subfield H, spoken word. So the subfield H here is coming from the content type vocabulary. So there's a number of different relationships, and I'm just going to name them briefly here. On the left side, we see the where the instructions are in RDA and the chapter numbers. There's primary relationships in 17. There, and this is something that we actually haven't been able to implement. There are what I have termed associated relationships of group 2 entities. These are our agents. And then with group 1 entities, so these would be between different works, and then authority relationships. And on the right side, these are the appendices that are important. So Appendix I, we use for our relationship designators. That would be the subfield E that we saw earlier, that appends to the access points of a name. Appendix J, these are the relationship designators we use for relationships between works, expressions, manifestations, and items. Appendix K is only used in authority records. So for the good example here would be if you go and you look up Mark Twain's authority record, you will see one of these with his real identity relationship to Samuel Clemens. And then Mark Twain, which is a pseudonym, the pseudonym Mark Twain also had 2 other pseudonyms, so you'll see those. So it's a fun one to look at. And the last one is Appendix M. It's really the same as Appendix J, but it's subject oriented. And it's like analysis, critique, that type of thing. And you would use it for when it's most helpful if you've got like a master's thesis that is analyzing a novel or a film or something like that, that it's really useful there. So the agent work or agent expression relationship, if you go, this link is available in the policy statement for Appendix I and the policy statement for Appendix J. You will see it, it'll take you there. It's a really good document that gives you many examples to walk you through, but suffice it to say that if you've got an access point, determine what the relationship of that access point is to the work that you are describing. So if the access point is one of authorship, find the term that means authorship in Appendix I and put that in the subfield E. If it's one of contribution, such as illustrations, find the term that means illustrator, put that in the subfield E. You can have as many terms as are necessary. You use a comma-separated list. Each term is in its own subfield E. So here we have an author illustrator. Here we've got organizer. Here we've got degree granting institution. So these are all different examples coming out of Appendix I. So your structured descriptions are going to look like this. You will have your constructed access point here at the end, and immediately in front of it, you will have the terminology from Appendix J. And these are going to be for your relationships between works and expressions or between different manifestations. So for works and expressions, we're typically going to see 700 fields or 730 fields. And for manifestations, we're typically going to see 776 fields, which end up being little mini bib records, all in a 776 field, all cozied up in there. Adaptations. So when you have an adaptation, the adaptation is a new work, and the adapter is the creator of that new work. So here we have the novel Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey on the left. On the right, we have the graphic novelization that was adapted by Bryn Stevens. So Bryn Stevens is the creator of this adaptation and gets that credit. And then we can construct these relationships between these two. So we can see it in the 700 here, right? So McCaffrey's Dragonflight adapted as graphic novel, parentheses, work. And then we give the authorized access point of the creator and the preferred title of work for the graphic novel. Same for on the graphic novel of Dragonflight, we have graphic novelization of parentheses work. And then we point to the structured description for McCaffrey's Dragonflight. Derivatives are pretty common, particularly for novels and movies. Here we've got, there were two different short stories by Arthur C. Clarke, which were used as inspiration for the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was then novelized by Clarke as a novel. So this is a rare example of a movie not being made from the novel, but the novel actually being made from the movie. So I've provided a couple of examples here. So if we're looking at the bibliographic record for the movie, we can see the relationships here inspired by, pointing to the two short stories, and then that the movie was adapted as the novel, as novel, parentheses, of work. And don't get me started on the way that these are formed, because they're kind of ridiculous, but you can see it's pointing to the novel. Here we've got a representation for one of the short stories, Sentinel of Eternity, and then we see it as inspiration for 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I forgot the motion picture qualifier there, so I'll add that when we're done. Same thing over here. And I forgot it, or I think it's there and it just fell off. But anyway, this provides a good example of derivatives. Related expressions. Here we have A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair, complemented by expression. There is no vocabulary term in Appendix J to really state the relationship between the text and the spoken word. So when you have an audiobook, you either just don't have a relationship, or you have to rely on this complemented by expression. That's the best that we can get to. And then you would use in subfield H the content type vocabulary term. So this is for the print book. We're pointing to the spoken word. If we flip it around and we have the record for the spoken word audiobook, we would use subfield H text to point to that. Over here, we've got the audio disc version and the online version of the audiobook, and we can use the 776 to say online version and compact disc version. So we've got the inverse relationship happening here. And we made it. Here are the good dogs who did not make much noise. And time for questions.
Please ask your questions. Bobby doesn't bite.
That's a great question, Sarah. How much, if at all, do you see this changing with official RDA? I knew this question was going to come up. And it's really difficult for me to kind of sort out my internal feelings on this. So take this for what it's worth, which is my own personal opinion that I think is well informed by a lot of the facts and such that I have been seeing, and has been backed up by a couple of people I know who used to be on the RDA steering committee. Official RDA has, if you think about it as a continuum, there's pragmatism on one end and theory way on the other end. And we have, since Osborne's seminal Crisis in Cataloging from 1949 or 50, something like that, that article, which was very steeped in the problem that cataloging was too theoretical and not pragmatic. And we've really moved into a pragmatic zone with, in particular, the ISBD instructions with AACR2. And also, even though RDA, original RDA, is very much based on theoretical models, it's still fairly pragmatic, right? Official RDA just moves that pendulum way to the far theoretical side. So we have created new names for things that we have done all along, and that always like creates some consternation. The WEMI, for example, we've always done that. We've just kind of constructed these artificial concepts for it. So when it comes down to it, we're not going to be doing much different than we have been. The idea behind official RDA is that everything basically is optional. And so it really depends on the institution, however you define institution, your library, your consortium, the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, the Library of Congress, whatever, to create what's called a metadata application profile. And so if you go, for example, to the, please do not tell me that we have lost access to the Library of Congress. Oh my God. All right. Well, that's so disturbing. Okay, I'm not gonna go there. It
Bobby, I was able to get to it.
okay,
So
maybe
there
it's just
may-
me.
So there may be something in what you typed that.
Thank you. I mean, that should go. Anyway, BibCo, if you look the BibCo standard record, you will also see that in its title it says metadata application profile. And it's a very long list of elements, and then it references RDA instructions, and it gives mark tags, and it says use this if applicable, optional, don't use. So that's what we're looking at with official RDA, is that we'll have these metadata application profiles that will give you instructions for a book. Use this, don't use that, use this if it's applicable, and this is optional. So it'll just kind of give you that type of thing. Oh, and you found the PDF. There we go. So that one works. Yes. So this is it. So that's the one. Yeah. Oh, you're on the training phase too. Interesting. So you're the one to really talk about more of this, I suppose. I am still a bit in the dark about how to even begin to teach official RDA. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, so as you
Yeah.
probably can guess, I'm an adjunct at Dominican, so
Oh, okay.
I also have not started to teach it. And I am a lone public library rep on these committees, and so I am just curious, but other like very experienced practitioners, how they view this upcoming transition and all that kind of fun stuff. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, you bet. Um, John, I see your question for the audiobook headings. I don't think they use H anymore, they use S. Bob Maxwell told us to use H in the last training I was at. I know they have flipped back and forth between that, but my last instruction from somebody who knows things was to use H, because I know my originally it was S. So yeah, things change. Anyway, Shirley's asking about the relationship between the 490 and the 8XX fields. So that's also a good question. The 490 is the transcription of the series title as it appears on the resource itself. The 8XX field is the access point for that series title. So you always want to check the authority file first and see if an authority record has been created for that series. And if it has, you would use that. If not, then the 8XX will be identical to what you have in the 490, unless that series is an author series, by which we mean the series itself was created by the author, in which case we would create it the same way that we do any other work. So the series is a work, and so we would use the authorized access point of the creator followed by the series title proper, which normally is the preferred title of work for the series. We don't tend to really need additions for those. We tend to see the additions more on on publisher series. So they might have a qualifier that says series or something like that. So that's the main relationship there. So it's possible for the 490 and the 8X and an 830 to be identical. They are doing different jobs. One is giving you what it looks like. The other is simply an access point. Green is asking what AI model I've been using. I've been using ChatGPT. I actually subscribed to it so that I could use it a little more often. I've been trying to use it gently because I'm still concerned about the energy usage and whatnot, but I am also wanting to be proactive about how it can be used and what it cannot do, because I do not want administrators to say, oh, look, ChatGPT could catalog something and we don't need a person. And I can tell you that's absolutely not the case. It cannot do a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm just trying to get ahead of that and provide evidence for that. But it has been useful as a tool for things. I do need to find some others and play with those as well. Rosalie is asking regarding plates. When illustrations appear on unnumbered pages within a book, I see them counted as plates, even though they are not printed on special paper. These should not have been counted as plates, but instead entered as unnumbered pages in the 300. So that's a great question to the if there is a section, and this often happens, like a good example would be a biography of somebody famous, and then in the hardcover version they'll have different paper with those plates on them, with the images. So their plates, they'll have the images, it'll be in there. Then when it goes to paperback, they'll use cheaper paper and they'll just print it right on the cheap paper, right? But in cataloging, we don't make that distinction between paperback and hardback. We use the same record. So that could be an instance where that happens. The other, and I think it's also just kind of common to call them plates, but you could just say also 8 unnumbered pages as well, and not call them plates if they truly aren't. So that really comes down to judgment and you looking at the and feeling the evidence, right? So yeah. John, I'll look that up again and make sure. I went to a training, I think it was a bridge training. I can't remember. It was Bob Maxwell, and he is definitely a font of knowledge for those things. So I'll try and find it and send that to you. And that, so if your consortium can't handle the H, that's, you use what you got to use, right, for your own catalog for sure. Santa's question is the distinction on plate, the paper or the printing method. It's kind of both. So it is the printing method, and the paper that is used for the printing is different. So that's kind of what sets it apart. And your addition here, I thought plate specifically meant lithograph or something. So there's a lot of terms that tend to be used less specifically, get conflated with other things. I mean, plate is often conflated with illustrations because the illustrations typically tend to be on plates, but it doesn't have to be. It could be text. So yeah. I guess it wouldn't, it's probably really not something to agonize too much about, to be honest with you. If you missed the idea of plate and just said pages, I can't imagine users being thrown by that, honestly. I know we always want to be like as perfect as we can be with these things, but it's probably more important for a special collection. And remember, like, none of us know everything, right? And this is the beauty of shared cataloging, of consortial cataloging. So if you're uncertain, don't worry about it. If you're uncertain, omit it, or just give it as a 500 note and let somebody else say, oh, okay, I know what this is. I will jazz this up.
Okay, last call for questions. We're coming up on 1 p.m. and we thank everyone for attending. Please be on the lookout. You should receive a survey request either today or next week. Please complete it because the committee does take a look at that. And if you are interested in serving on the committee, please feel free to contact any of the planning committee members. We can be found on the Laconia Technical Services section page. And we are having a planning meeting in March to complete the rest of this year. So if you would like to attend us, join us. This is a good time to do so. And I see no more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording after I thank Bobby. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again. It's always fun to come see you.